Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about how to set up your still life. So yesterday we talked about what a still life is. A still life is a drawing of a group of objects that don't move. So they stay in the same place for the whole entire time that you're creating the drawing. So once you place your objects in the way that you want them to be, you will no longer move them until you're finished with your drawing. So what we are going to be focusing on today is something called composition. Composition is the way you arrange things either on your paper or in a photograph, the way that you place things. And there are things that you can do to make your still life more interesting, and we're going to talk about that today. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is where you're going to be setting up your still life. So you should have chosen 3 objects to draw from observation. So it could have been any 3 objects, and we're going to talk more today about what makes a good still life object. So you need to think about where you're going to be setting up your still life because it should not be moving. Where you place it is where you should leave it. So you want to think about a place that you could set it up where the background is pretty plain. So this is optional, but I would really encourage you to set up your still life in an area where the background is plain or has a neutral background. So a neutral background means it's either brown, white, black, or some type of plain color that doesn't get in the way of you drawing your still life. So that could be you arranging it against a white wall or a plain colored wall. You could also use fabric. You could tack some fabric up and then put it there. You can also use like construction paper. What I've created, there's a million different ways you can do it. What I've made is this cardboard box. So I've cut 2 sides in the top of this cardboard box in order to create this little still life area. And so the good thing about this is not only do I have it to where there's a neutral background, but if I needed to move it, I could pick it up and move it around my room if I needed space on my desk or something like that. So that is the very, very first thing you want to think about when you are creating your still life. Now we're going to talk about ways to create a good composition. So like I said, a composition is the way things are arranged in a work of art. So there are a couple things you can do to make a more interesting composition. The first thing is try to find objects that are of different sizes. So just for starters, I'm going to use this plant that I have. And I'm going to also use this bottle. And I think I'll use this set of books here. Okay? So you can see that these all have different heights to them. And so once I start to arrange things, they'll look more interesting. So I might decide that I want, just now I decided that I wanted, I didn't want 3 books, I only wanted 2, and you can see there's 2 books right here. That I only wanted 2 books, just so that way it would be even lower. So try to think about things that can be different heights. So that's the first thing. So you want to play around with where things are to see what you like. So if I have books, I might want to place my books, place something on top of my books so that way it's more interesting. And that is okay to me. It's not really that interesting. And another thing that we should be talking about is overlapping. So overlapping is when you put one object in front of another. Overlapping adds more interest to your work. And now I could even go one step further and add maybe like some flowers right here in the shoe. So that is a more interesting composition because you have your books, you have your Xbox controller, your shoes, your flowers. You just want to make sure that you're adding things that are interesting and adding them in an interesting way. Another thing is you want to think about what angle you're putting things. If you put your shoe straight on like this, it might be more difficult for you to draw than if you put it at an angle. Same thing with anything really. So think about what's easiest for you and what's going to make your still life easier for you to do and what your skill level is. Something else you can do is, like I had earlier, I had stacked some books up like this. I could actually take a piece of fabric. This is actually an IKEA bag. This is too many books. I could take a piece of fabric and lay it on top, or I could even drape it over the top of the still life area like that. And then I could start setting up my still life. So that way you're adding some even more variety to your work. So this to me is a little boring. So I could add a bottle, or I could even add something small like a chapstick. So just think about what you'd like to add or take away from your object or from your still life. Next, I want to talk about some things that you should not do for your still life. So the first thing is things that are the same. So if you're drawing a bunch of things that are really similar, it's going to be sort of boring. A scrunchie would be a good still life option just because it has all of those shadows. We're going to talk about shadows in a minute. But you really don't want to do two things that are just the same. Another thing, like I said, the rule of odds. So if you have an even number of stuff, sometimes that is less interesting than an odd number of things. Also, you don't want to place your stuff really far apart and even like that, because there's something called a focal point. So the focal point is the focus of your work, the place where your eye goes directly to. You want to have something that your eye can go towards. And right now we have two things that are similar and of the same height. So our eyes aren't really going anywhere specific, and it's also very boring. So you could go ahead and add something here, like that, and it would make it just a little bit more interesting. Like I said, you don't want to space things apart like this. It's going to be harder for you to draw, and also it's just going to look like it's really spaced out, and it's not meant to be a still life. You also want to stay away from things that are flat, because drawing things that are flat is going to be way harder than drawing things that are three-dimensional, because you only have one shape. This is only one shape. It's a piece of paper, so it's a rectangle basically. So it's very hard to do. If you wanted to add something like this, like a Post-it note, you could try to put it at an angle or stick it somewhere, but just in my opinion, I wouldn't do it. Okay, so the very last thing I want to talk to you about is your light source. So as you can see right here, you can't really see what's in my still life because it's so dark. So you want to make sure that you have your still life in an area that's getting a good amount of light. So that could mean that you're turning your still life towards towards maybe your lights in your room, so you can see that a little bit lighter, like that. That could also mean that you're opening the blinds of a window, so that kind of brings the light out a little bit more. Another thing you can do is use a lamp, like a table lamp or just like any type of lamp. That really helps to be able to see your still life better, because you're going to be able to see the highlights and the shadows really well. getting something like a bottle that reflects is also really fun and easy to draw because you can see these highlights and these shadows in your object, and so they're very easy to draw. You are, for part of your project, going to have to shade, so you're going to have to be looking at these like really light areas right here, and then these mid areas and the dark areas and the shadows, things like that. So you do want to think about your light source. The last thing you want to do when you've set up a good composition and you've decided this is how you want to draw your still life, you're going to want to go ahead and take a picture of it from the angle that you're drawing from. The reason is because if something happens to move, you're going to want to remember where everything is. And also, it's just good to have if you need it as a guide. And like I said, you want to take the picture from where you're going to be drawing. So sitting in your seat and looking at it is a good idea to do. And that's it.